Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are in Book 4 of The Will to Power. This is the final book or volume in this series of, I would say they were more like collected notes for an intended work. I don't know if it would have been called The Will to Power, but this is the name of the compilation of these different papers of Nietzsche's that were put into one volume after his death. So with that said, I will go ahead and keep going. We are up to Aphorism 901. Principal Standpoint. One should not suppose the mission of the higher species to be the leading of inferior men, as Comte does, for instance, but the inferior should be regarded as the foundation upon which a higher species may live their higher life, upon which alone they can stand. The conditions under which a strong, noble species maintains itself, in the matter of intellectual discipline, are precisely the reverse of those under which the industrial masses, the tea grocers a la Spencer, subsist. Those qualities which are within the grasp only of the strongest and most terrible natures, and which make their existence possible leisure, adventure, disbelief, and even dissipation, would necessarily ruin mediocre natures, and does do so, when they possess them. In the case of the latter industry, regularity, moderation, and strong conviction are in their proper place. In short, all gregarious virtues. Under their influence, these mediocre men become perfect. 902. Concerning the ruling types. The shepherd, as opposed to the lord, the former is only a means to the maintenance of the herd, the latter the purpose for which the herd exists. 903. The temporary preponderance of social values is both comprehensible and useful. It is a matter of building a foundation upon which a stronger species will ultimately be made possible. The standard of strength, to be able to live under the transvalued valuations, and to desire them for all eternity. State and society regarded as a substructure, economic point of view, education conceived as breeding. 904. A consideration which free spirits lack, that the same discipline which makes a strong nature still stronger, and enables it to go in for big undertakings, breaks up and withers the mediocre. Doubt, la largeur de cœur, experiment, independence. 905. The hammer. How should men who must value in the opposite way be constituted? Men who possess all the qualities of the modern soul, but are strong enough to convert them into real health. The means to their task. 906. The strong man who is mighty in the instincts of a strong and healthy organization digests his deeds just as well as he digests his meals. He even gets over the effects of heavy fare. In the main, however, he is led by an inviolable and severe instinct, which prevents his doing anything which goes against his grain, just as he never does anything against his taste. 907. Can we foresee the favorable circumstances under which the creatures of the highest value might arise? It is 1,000 times too complicated, and the probabilities of failure are very great. On that account, we cannot be inspired by the thought of striving after them. Skepticism. To oppose this, we can enhance courage, insight, hardness, independence, and the feeling of responsibility. We can also subtilize and learn to forestall the delicacy of the scales, so that favorable accidents may be enlisted on our side. 908. Before we can think of acting, an enormous amount of work requires to be done. In the main, however, a cautious exploitation of the present conditions would be our best and most advisable course of action. The actual creation of conditions such as those which occur by accident presupposes the existence of iron men, such as have not lived. Our first task must be to make the personal ideal prevail and become realized. He who has understood the nature of man and the origin of mankind's greatest specimens shudders before man and takes flight from all action. This is the result of inherited valuations. My consolation is that the nature of man is evil, and this guarantees his strength. 909. The typical forms of self-development, or the 8 principal questions. 1. Do we want to be more multifarious or more simple than we are? 2. Do we want to be happier than we are, or more indifferent to both happiness and unhappiness? 3. Do we want to be more satisfied with ourselves, or more exacting and more inexorable? 4. Do we want to be softer, more yielding, and more human than we are, or more inhuman? 5. Do we want to be more prudent than we are, or more daring? 6. Do we want to attain a goal, or do we want to avoid all goals, like the philosopher, for instance, who sets a boundary, a cul-de-sac, a prison, a piece of foolishness in every goal? 7. Do we want to become more respected, or more feared, or more despised? 8. Do we want to become tyrants and seducers, or do we want to become shepherds and gregarious animals? 910. The type of my disciples. To such men as concern vie in any way, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill-treatment, indignities of all kinds. I wish them to be acquainted with profound self-contempt, with the martyrdom of self-distrust, with the misery of the defeated. I have no pity for them, because I wish them to have only one thing which today proves whether a man has any value or not, namely the capacity of sticking to his guns. 911. The happiness and self-contentedness of the Lazzaroni, or the blessedness of the beautiful souls, or the consumptive love of Puritan pietists, proves nothing in regard to the order of rank among men. As a great educator, one ought inexorably to thrash a race of such blissful creatures into unhappiness. The danger of belittlement and of a slackening of powers follows immediately. I am opposed to happiness a la Spinoza or a la Epicurus, and to all the relaxation of contemplative states. But when virtue is the means to such happiness, well then one must master even virtue. 912. I cannot see how anyone can make up for having missed going to a good school at the proper time. Such a person does not know himself. He walks through life without ever having learned to walk. His soft muscles betray themselves at every step. Occasionally, life itself is merciful enough to make a man recover his lost and severe schooling. By means of periods of sickness, perhaps which exact the utmost willpower and self-control, or by means of a sudden state of poverty, which threatens his wife and child, and which may force a man to such activity as will restore energy to his slackened tendons, and a tough spirit to his will to life. The most desirable thing of all, however, is, under all circumstances, to have severe discipline at the right time, i.e., at that age when it makes us proud that people should expect great things from us. For this is what distinguishes hard schooling as good schooling from every other schooling, namely, that a good deal is demanded, that a good deal is severely exacted, that goodness, nay, even excellence itself is required, as if it were normal. That praise is scanty, that leniency is non-existent, that blame is sharp, practical, and without reprieve, and has no regard to talents and antecedents. We are in every way in need of such a school, and this holds good of corporeal as well of spiritual things. It would be fatal to draw distinctions here. The same discipline makes the soldier and the scholar efficient, and looked at more closely, there is no true scholar who has not the instincts of a true soldier in his veins. To be able to command and to be able to obey in a proud fashion, to keep one's place in rank and file, and yet to be ready at any moment to lead, to prefer danger to comfort, not to weigh what is permitted and what is forbidden in a tradesman's balance, to be more hostile to pettiness, slyness, and parasitism than to wickedness. What is it that one learns in a hard school? To obey and to command. 913. We should repudiate merit, and do only that which stands above all praise and above all understanding. 914. The new forms of morality. Faithful vows concerning that which one wishes to do or to leave undone. Complete indefinite abstention from many things. Test as to whether one is right for such discipline. 9:15. It is my desire to naturalize asceticism. I would substitute the old intention of asceticism, self-denial, by my own intention, self-strengthening. A gymnastic of the will, a period of abstinence and occasional fasting of every kind, even in things intellectual, a casuistry in deeds, in regards to the opinions which we derive from our powers. We should try our hand at adventure and at deliberate dangers. Diners chez magni, all intellectual gourmets with spoilt stomachs. Tests also to be devised for discovering a man's power in keeping his word. 9:16. The things which have become spoilt through having been abused by the Church. 1. People have scarcely got the courage yet to bring to light the natural utility and necessity of asceticism for the purpose of the education of the will. Our ridiculous world of education, before whose eyes the useful state official hovers as an ideal to be striven for, believes that it has completed its duty when it has instructed or trained the brain. It never even suspects that something else is first of all necessary, the education of willpower. Tests are devised for everything except for the most important things of all. Whether a man can will, whether he can promise. The young man completes his education without a question or an inquiry having been made concerning the problem of the highest value of his nature. 2. Fasting. In every sense, even as a means of maintaining the capacity for taking pleasures in all good things, for instance, to give up reading for a while, to hear no music for a while, to cease from being amiable for a while, one ought also to have fast days for one's virtues. 3. The monastery. Temporary isolation with severe seclusion from all letters, for instance, a kind of profound introspection and self-recovery, which does not go out of the way of temptations, but out of the way of duties, a stepping out of the daily round of one's environment, a detachment from the tyranny of stimuli and external influences, which condemns us to expend our power only in reactions, and does not allow it to gather volume until it bursts into spontaneous activity. Let anybody examine our scholars closely. They only think reflexively, i.e., they must first read before they can think. 4. Feasts. A man must be very coarse in order not to feel the presence of Christians and Christian values as oppressive, so oppressive as to send all festive moods to the devil. By feast we understand pride, high spirits, exuberance, scorn of all kinds of seriousness and philistinism, a divine saying of yea to oneself as the result of physical plenitude and perfection. All states to which the Christian cannot honestly say yea. A feast is a pagan thing par excellence. 5. The courage of one's own nature, dressing up in morality. To be able to call one's passions good without the help of a moral formula. This is the standard which measures the extent to which a man is able to say yea to his own nature, namely, how much or how little he has to have recourse to morality. 6. Death. The foolish physiological fact must be converted into a moral necessity. One should live in such a way that one may have the will to die at the right time. 9:17. The feel of one's self stronger or expressed otherwise. Happiness always presupposes a comparison, not necessarily with others, but with oneself in the midst of a state of growth, and without being conscious that one is comparing. Artificial accentuation, whether by means of exciting chemicals or exciting errors, hallucinations. Take, for instance, the Christian's feeling of security. He feels himself strong in his confidence, in his patience, and his resignation. This artificial accentuation he owes to the fancy that he is protected by a god. Take the feeling of superiority, for instance, as when the Caliph of Morocco sees only globes on which his 3 united kingdoms cover 4/5 of the space. Take the feeling of uniqueness, for instance, as when the European imagines that culture belongs to Europe alone, and when he regards himself as a sort of abridged cosmic process, or as when the Christian makes all existence revolve around the salvation of man. The question is, where does one begin to feel the pressure of constraint? It is thus that different degrees are ascertained. A philosopher, for instance, in the midst of the coolest and most transmontane feats of abstraction, feels like a fish that enters its element, while colors and tones oppress him, not to speak of those dumb desires, of that which others call the ideal. 918. A healthy and vigorous little boy will look up sarcastically if he be asked, "Wilt thou become virtuous?" But he immediately becomes eager if he be asked, "Wilt thou become stronger than thy comrades?" How does one become stronger? By deciding slowly, and by holding firmly to the decision once it is made. Everything else follows of itself. Spontaneous and changeable natures, both species of the weak. We must not confound ourselves with them. We must feel distance, betimes. Beware of good-natured people. Dealings with them make one torpid. All environment is good which makes one exercise those defensive and aggressive powers which are instinctive in man. All one's inventiveness should apply itself to putting one's power of will to the test. Here the determining factor must be recognized as something which is not knowledge, astuteness, or wit. One must learn to command betimes, likewise to obey. A man must learn modesty and tact in modesty. He must learn to distinguish and to honor where modesty is displayed. He must likewise distinguish and honor wherever he bestows his confidence. What does one repent most? One's modesty, the fact that one has not lent an ear to one's most individual needs, the fact that one has mistaken oneself, the fact that one has esteemed oneself low, the fact that one has lost all delicacy of hearing in regard to one's instincts. This want of reverence in regard to oneself is avenged by all sorts of losses, in health, friendship, well-being, pride, cheerfulness, freedom, determination, courage. A man never forgives himself later on for this want of genuine egoism. He regards it as an objection and as a cause of doubt concerning his real ego. 919. I should like man to begin by respecting himself. Everything else follows of itself. Naturally, a man ceases from being anything to others in this way, for this is precisely what they are least likely to forgive. What? A man who respects himself? This is something quite different from the blind instinct to love oneself. Nothing is more common in the love of the sexes, or in that duality which is called ego, than a certain contempt for that which is loved, the fatalism of love. 920. I will have this or that. I would that this or that were so. I know that this or that is so the degrees of power. The man of will, the man of desire, the man of fate. 921. The means by which a strong species maintains itself. It grants itself the right of exceptional actions, as a test of the power of self-control and of freedom. It abandons itself to states in which a man is not allowed to be anything else than a barbarian. It tries to acquire strength of will by every kind of asceticism. It is not expansive. It practices silence. It is cautious in regard to all charms. It learns to obey in such a way that obedience provides a test of self-maintenance. Casuistry is carried to its highest pitch in regards to points of honor. It never argues, what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. But conversely, it regards reward and the ability to repay as a privilege, as a distinction. It does not covet other people's virtues. 922. The way in which one has to treat raw savages and the impossibility of dispensing with barbarous methods becomes obvious in practice when one is transplanted, with all one's European pampering, to a spot such as the Congo, or anywhere else where it is necessary to maintain one's mastery over barbarians. 923. Warlike and peaceful people. Art thou a man who has the instincts of a warrior in thy blood? If this be so, another question must be put. Do thy instincts impel thee to attack or to defend? The rest of mankind, all those whose instincts are not warlike, desire peace, concord, freedom, equal rights. These things are but names and steps for one and the same thing. Such men only wish to go where it is not necessary for them to defend themselves. Such men become discontented with themselves when they are obliged to offer resistance. They would fain create circumstances in which war is no longer necessary. If the worst came to the worst, they would resign themselves, obey, and submit. All these things are better than waging war. Thus does the Christian's instinct, for instance, whisper to him. In the born warrior's character, there is something of armor. Likewise, in the choice of his circumstances and in the development of every one of his qualities, weapons are best evolved by the latter type, shields are best devised by the former. What expedients and what virtues do the unarmed and the undefended require in order to survive, and even to conquer? 924. What will become of a man who no longer has any reasons for either defense or attack? What will remain of his passions when he has lost those which form his defense and his weapons? 925. A marginal note for the Niaiserie Anglaise. Do not to others that which you would not that they should do unto you. This stands for wisdom. This stands for prudence. This stands as the very basis of morality, as a quote-unquote golden maxim. John Stuart Mill believes in it, and what Englishman does not? But the maxim does not bear investigation. The argument, do not as you would not be done by, forbids action which produces harmful results. The thought behind that action is invariably requited. What if someone came forward with the Principe in his hands and said, we must do those actions alone which enable us to steal a march on others, and which deprive others of the power of doing the same to us? On the other hand, let us remember the Corsican, who pledges his honor to vendetta. He too does not desire to have a bullet through him, but the prospect of one, the probability of getting one, does not deter him from vindicating his honor. And in all really decent actions, are we not intentionally indifferent as to what results they bring? To avoid an action which might have harmful results, that would be tantamount to forbidding all decent actions in general. Apart from this, the above maxim is valuable because it betrays a certain type of man. It is the instinct of the herd which formulates itself through him. We are equal, we regard each other as equal. As I am to thee, so art thou to me. In this community, equivalence of actions is really believed in, an equivalence which never under any circumstances manifests itself in real conditions. It is impossible to requite every action. Among real individuals, equal actions do not exist. Consequently, there can be no such thing as requital. When I do anything, I am very far from thinking that any man is able to do anything at all like it. The action belongs to me. Nobody can pay me back for anything I do. The most that can be done is to make me the victim of another action. 926. Against John Stuart Mill. I abhor the man's vulgarity when he says, what is right for one man is right for another. Do not to others that which you would not that they should do unto you. Such principles would fain establish the whole of human traffic upon mutual services, so that every action would appear to be a cash payment for something done to us. The hypothesis here is ignoble to the last degree. It is taken for granted that there is some sort of equivalence in value between my actions and thine. The most personal value of an action is simply cancelled in this manner. That part of an action which has no equivalent, which cannot be remunerated. Quote-unquote reciprocity is a piece of egregious vulgarity. The mere fact that what I do cannot and may not be done by another, that there is no such thing as equivalence, except in the very select circles where one actually has one's equal, inter pares. That in a really profound sense a man never requites, because he is something unique in himself and can only do unique things. This fundamental conviction contains the cause of aristocratic aloofness from the mob, because the latter believes in equality and consequently in the feasibility of equivalence and reciprocity. 927. The suburban Philistinism of moral valuations and of its concepts useful and harmful is well founded. It is the necessary point of view of a community which is only able to see and survey immediate and proximate consequences. The state and the political man are already in need of a more supermoral attitude of mind, because they have to calculate concerning a much more complicated tissue of consequences. An economic policy for the whole world should be possible, which could look at things in such broad perspective that all its isolated demands would seem for the moment not only unjust, but arbitrary. 928. Should one follow one's feelings? To set one's life at stake on the impulse of the moment and actuated by a generous feeling has little worth and does not even distinguish one. Everybody is alike in being capable of this, and in behaving in this way with determination. The criminal, the bandit, and the Corsican certainly outstrip the honest man. A higher degree of excellence would be to overcome this impulse, and to refrain from performing a heroic deed at its bidding, and to remain cold, reasonable, free from the tempestuous surging of concomitant sensations of delight. The same holds good of pity. It must first be sifted through reason. Without this, it becomes just as dangerous as any other passion. The blind yielding to a passion, whether it be generosity, pity, or hostility, is the cause of the greatest evil. Greatness of character does not consist in not possessing these passions. On the contrary, a man should possess them to a terrible degree, but he should lead them by the bridle, and even this he should not do out of love of control, but merely because. 929. To give up one's life for a cause. Very effective. But there are many things for which one gives up one's life. The passions, one and all, will be gratified. Whether one's life be pledged to pity, to anger, or to revenge, it matters not from the point of view of value. How many have not sacrificed their lives for pretty girls, and even for what is worse, their health? When one has temperament, one instinctively chooses the most dangerous things. If one is a philosopher, for instance, one chooses the adventure of speculation. If one is virtuous, one chooses immorality. One kind of man will risk nothing, another kind will risk everything. Are we despisers of life? On the contrary, what we seek is life raised to a higher power, life in danger. But, let me repeat, we do not, on that account, wish to be more virtuous than others. Pascal, for instance, wished to risk nothing, and remained a Christian. That perhaps was virtuous. A man always sacrifices something. 930. How many advantages does not a man sacrifice? To how small an extent does he seek his own profit? All his emotions and passions wish to assert their rights, and how remote a passion is from that cautious utility which consists in personal profit. A man does not strive after quote-unquote happiness. One must be an Englishman to be able to believe that a man is always seeking his own advantage. Our desires long to violate things with passion. Their overflowing strength seeks obstacles. 931. All passions are generally useful, some directly, others indirectly. In regards to utility, it is absolutely impossible to fix upon any gradation of values. However, certainly the forces of nature in general may be regarded as good, i.e., useful, from an economic point of view. They are still the sources of much that is terrible and much that is fatally irrevocable. The most one might say would be that the mightiest passions are the most valuable, seeing that no stronger sources of power exist. 932. All well-meaning, helpful, good-natured attitudes of mind have not come to be honored on account of their usefulness, but because they are the conditions peculiar to rich souls, who are able to bestow, and whose value consists in their vital exuberance. Look into the eyes of the benevolent man. In them you will see the exact reverse of self-denial, of hatred of self, of Pascalism. 933. In short, what we require is to dominate the passions, and not to weaken or extirpate them. The greater the dominating power of the will, the greater the freedom that may be given to the passions. The quote-unquote great man is so, owing to the free scope which he gives to his desires, and to the still greater power which knows how to enlist these magnificent monsters into its service. The good man in every stage of civilization is at one and the same time the least dangerous and the most useful, a sort of medium. The idea formed of such a man by the common mind is that he is someone whom one has no reason to fear, but whom one must not therefore despise. Education, essentially a means of ruining exceptions in favor of the rule. Culture, essentially the means of directing taste against the exceptions in favor of the mediocre. Only when a culture can dispose of an overflow of force is it capable of being a hothouse for the luxurious culture of the exception, of the experiment, of the danger, of the nuance. This is the tendency of every aristocratic culture. 934. All questions of strength. To what extent ought one to try and prevail against the preservative measures of society and the latter's prejudices? To what extent ought one to unfetter one's terrible qualities, through which so many go to the dogs? To what extent ought one to run counter to truth, and take up side with its most questionable aspects? To what extent ought one to oppose suffering, self-contempt, pity, disease, vice, when it is always open to question whether one can ever master them? What does not kill us makes us stronger. And finally, to what extent ought one to acknowledge the rights of the rule, of the commonplace, of the petty, of the good, of the upright, in fact, of the average man, without thereby allowing oneself to become vulgar? The strongest test of character is to resist being ruined by the seductiveness of goodness. Goodness must be regarded as a luxury, as a refinement, as a vice. Section 3. The Noble Man. 935. Type. Real goodness, nobility, greatness of soul, as a result of vital wealth, which does not give in order to receive, and which has no desire to elevate itself by being good. Squandering is typical of genuine goodness. Vital personal wealth is its prerequisite. 936. Aristocracy. Gregarious ideals at present culminating in the highest standard of value for society. It has been attempted to give them a cosmic, yea, and even a metaphysical value. I defend aristocracy against them. Any society which would of itself preserve a feeling of respect and delicatesse in regards to freedom must consider itself as an exception, and have a force against it from which it distinguishes itself, and upon which it looks down with hostility. The more rights I surrender, and the more I level myself down to others, the more deeply do I sink into the average and ultimately into the greatest number. The first condition which an aristocratic society must have in order to maintain a high degree of freedom among its members is that extreme tension which arises from the presence of the most antagonistic instincts in all its units, from their will to dominate. If you would fain do away with strong contrasts and differences of rank, you will abolish strong love, lofty attitudes of mind, and the feeling of individuality. Concerning the actual psychology of societies based upon freedom and equality, what is it that tends to diminish in such a society? The will to be responsible for oneself. The loss of this is a sign of the decline of autonomy. The ability to defend and to attack, even in spiritual matters. The power of command, the sense of reverence, of subservience, the ability to be silent. Great passion, great achievements, tragedy, and cheerfulness. 937. In 1814, Augustin Thierry read what Montlosier had said in his work De la Monarchie Française. He answered with a cry of indignation and set himself to his task. That immigrant had said, quote, Tribe of freedom, tribes of slaves, torn from our hands, tributary people, new people, license has been granted to you to be free, but not to us to be noble. For us everything is a right. For you everything is a matter of grace. We are not part of your community. We are entire by ourselves." 938. How constantly the aristocratic world shears and weakens itself ever more and more. By means of its noble instincts, it abandons its privileges, and owing to its refined and excessive culture, it takes an interest in the people, the weak, the poor, and the poetry of the lowly, etc. 939. There is such a thing as a noble and dangerous form of carelessness, which allows of profound conclusions and insight. The carelessness of the self-reliant and the over-rich soul, which has never troubled itself about friends, but which knows only hospitality and knows how to practice it, whose heart and house are open to all who will enter, beggar, cripple, or king. This is genuine sociability. He who is capable of it has hundreds of quote-unquote friends, but probably not one friend. 940. The teaching "nothing in excess" applies to men with overflowing strength. Not to the mediocre. Temperance and exercise are only steps to higher things. Above them stands golden nature. "Thou shalt," unconditional obedience in Stoics, and Christian and Arabian orders, and Kant's philosophy. It is immaterial whether this obedience is shown to a superior or to a concept. Higher than "thou shalt" stands "I will," the heroes. Higher than "I will" stands "I am," the gods of the Greeks. Barbarian gods express nothing of the pleasure of restraint. They are neither simple, nor light-hearted, nor moderate. 941. The essence of our gardens and palaces, and not to the same extent the essence of all yearning after riches, is the desire to rid the eye of disorder and vulgarity, and to build a home for our soul's nobility. The majority of people certainly believe that they will develop higher natures when those beautiful and peaceful things have operated upon them, hence the exodus to Italy, hence all traveling, etc., and all reading and visits to theaters. People want to be formed. That is the kernel of their labors for culture. That the strong, the mighty would themselves have a hand in the forming, and would fain have nothing strange about them. It is for this reason, too, that men go to open nature, not to find themselves, but to lose themselves and to forget themselves. The desire to get away from oneself is proper to all weaklings, and to all those who are disconnected with themselves. 942. The only nobility is that of birth and blood. I do not here refer to the prefix Lord and l'Almanach de Gotha. This is a parenthesis for donkeys. Wherever people speak of the aristocracy of intellect, reasons are generally not lacking for concealing something. It is known to be a password among ambitious Jews. Intellect alone does not ennoble. On the contrary, something is always needed to ennoble intellect. What then is needed? Blood. 943. What is noble? External punctiliousness, because this punctiliousness hedges a man about, keeps him at a distance, saves him from being confounded with somebody else. A frivolous appearance in word, clothing, and bearing, with which stoical hardness and self-control protect themselves from all prying inquisitiveness or curiosity. A slow step and slow glance. There are not too many valuable things on earth, and these come and wish to come of themselves to him who has value. We are not quick to admire. We know how to bear poverty, want, and even illness. We avoid small honors, owing to our mistrust of all who are over-ready to praise. For the man who praises believes he understands what he praises. But to understand, Balzac, that typical man of ambition, betrayed the fact that to comprehend is to equalize. Our doubt concerning the communicativeness of our hearts goes very deep. To us, loneliness is not a matter of choice, it is imposed upon us. We are convinced that we only have duties to our equals, to others we do as we think best. We know that justice is only to be expected among equals. Alas, this will not be realized for some time to come. We are ironical towards the gifted. We hold the belief that no morality is possible without good birth. We always feel as if we were those who had to dispense honors, while he is not found too frequently who would be worthy of honoring us. We are always disguised. The higher a man's nature, the more is he in need of remaining incognito. If there be a God, then out of sheer decency he ought only to show himself on earth in the form of a man. We are capable of otium, of the unconditional conviction that although a handicraft does not shame one in any sense, it certainly reduces one's rank. However much we may respect industry and know how to give it its due, we do not appreciate it in a bourgeois sense, or after the manner of the insatiable and cackling artists who, like hens, cackle and lay eggs and cackle again. We protect artists and poets and anyone who happens to be a master in something. But as creatures of a higher order than those who only know how to do something, who are only productive men, we do not confound ourselves with them. We find joy in all forms and ceremonies. We would fain foster everything formal, and we are convinced that courtesy is one of the greatest virtues. We feel suspicious of every kind of laissez-aller, including the freedom of the press and of thought, because under such conditions the intellect grows easygoing and coarse and stretches its limbs. We take pleasure in women as in perhaps daintier, more delicate, and more ethereal kind of creature. What a treat it is to meet creatures who have only dancing and nonsense and finery in their minds. They have always been the delight of every tense and profound male soul, whose life is burdened with heavy responsibilities. We take pleasure in princes and in priests, because in big things as in small, they actually uphold the belief in the difference of human values, even in the estimation of the past, and at least symbolically. We are able to keep silence, but we do not breathe a word of this in the presence of listeners. We are able to endure long enmities. We lack the power of easy reconciliations. We have a loathing of demagogism, of enlightenment, of amiability, and plebeian familiarity. We collect precious things, the needs of higher and fastidious souls. We wish to possess nothing in common. We want to have our own books and our landscapes. We protest against evil and fine experiences, and take care not to generalize too quickly. The individual case. How ironically we regard it when it has bad taste to put on the airs of a rule. We love that which is naive, and naive people, but as spectators and high creatures, we think Faust is just as simple as his Margaret. We have a low estimation of good people, because they are gregarious animals. We know how often an invaluable golden drop of goodness lies concealed beneath the most evil, the most malicious, and the hardest exterior, and that the single grain outweighs all the mere goody-goodiness of milk and watery souls. We don't regard a man of our kind as refuted by his vices, nor by his tomfooleries. We are well aware that we are not recognized with ease, and that we have every reason to make our foreground very prominent. 944. What is noble? The fact that one is constantly forced to be playing a part, that one is constantly searching for situations in which one is forced to put on airs, that one leaves happiness to the greatest number, the happiness which consists of inner peacefulness, of virtue, of comfort, and of Anglo-angelic back-parlor smugness, a la Spencer. That one instinctively seeks for heavy responsibilities, that one knows how to create enemies everywhere, at a pinch, even in oneself, that one contradicts the greatest number, not in words at all, but by continually behaving differently from them. 945. Virtue, for instance truthfulness, is our most noble and most dangerous luxury. We must not decline the disadvantages which it brings in its train. 946. We refuse to be praised. We do what serves our purpose, what gives us pleasure, or what we are obliged to do. 947. What is chastity in a man? It means that his taste in sex has remained noble, that in erotics he likes neither the brutal, the morbid, nor the clever. 948. The concept of honor is founded upon the belief in select society, in knightly excellences, in the obligation of having continually to play a part. In essentials, it means that one does not take one's life too seriously, that one adheres unconditionally to the most dignified manners in one's dealings with everybody, at least insofar as they do not belong to us, that one is neither familiar, nor good-natured, nor hearty, nor modest, except inter pares, that one is always playing a part. 949. The fact that one sets one's life, one's health, and one's honor at stake is the result of high spirits and of an overflowing and spendthrift will. It is not the result of philanthropy, but of the fact that every danger kindles our curiosity concerning the measure of our strength and provokes our courage. 950. Eagles swoop down straight. Nobility of soul is best revealed by the magnificent and proud foolishness with which it makes its attacks. 951. War should be made against all namby-pamby ideas of nobility. A certain modicum of brutality cannot be dispensed with, no more than we can do without a certain approximation to criminality. Self-satisfaction must not be allowed. A man should look upon himself with an adventurous spirit. He should experiment with himself and run risks with himself. No beautiful soul quackery should be tolerated. I want to give a more robust ideal, a chance of prevailing. 952. Paradise is under the shadow of a swordsman. This is also a symbol and a test word by which souls with noble and warrior-like origin betray and discover themselves. 953. The two paths. There comes a period when man has a surplus amount of power at his disposal. Science aims at establishing the slavery of nature. Then man acquires the leisure in which to develop himself into something new and more lofty, a new aristocracy. It is then that a large number of virtues, which are now conditions of existence, are superseded. Qualities which are no longer needed are on that account lost. We no longer need virtues. Consequently, we are losing them. Likewise, the morality of one thing is needful, of the salvation of the soul and of immortality. These were means wherewith to make men capable of enormous self-tyranny, through the emotion of great fear. The different kinds of needs by means of whose discipline man is formed. Need teaches work, thought, and self-control. Physiological purification and strengthening. The new aristocracy is in need of an opposing body which it may combat. It must be driven to extremities in order to maintain itself. The two futures of mankind. 1. The consequence of a leveling down of mediocrity. 2. Conscious aloofness and self-development. A doctrine which would cleave a gulf. It maintains the highest and the lowest species. It destroys the intermediate. The aristocracies, both spiritual and temporal, which have existed hitherto, proves nothing against the necessity of a new aristocracy. Section 4. The Lords of the Earth. 954. A certain question constantly recurs to us. It is perhaps a seductive and evil question. May it be whispered into the ears of those who have a right to such doubtful problems. Those strong souls of today whose dominion over themselves is unswerving. Is it not high time, now that the type gregarious animal is developing ever more and more in Europe, to set about rearing, thoroughly, artificially, and consciously, an opposite type, and to attempt to establish the latter's virtues? And would not the democratic movement itself find for the first time a sort of goal, salvation, and justification, if someone appeared who availed himself of it, so that at last, besides its new and sublime product, slavery, for this must be the end of European democracy, that higher species of ruling and Caesarean spirits might also be produced, which would stand upon it, hold it, and would elevate themselves through it? This new race would climb aloft to new and hitherto impossible things, to a broader vision, and to its task on earth. 955. The aspect of the European of today makes me very hopeful. A daring and ruling race is here building itself up upon the foundation of an extremely intelligent, gregarious mass. It is obvious that the educational movements for the latter are not alone prominent nowadays. 956. The same conditions which go to develop the gregarious animal also force the development of the leaders. 957. The question, and at the same time the task, is approaching with hesitation, terrible as fate, but nevertheless inevitable. How shall the earth as a whole be ruled? And to what end shall man as a whole, no longer as a people or as a race, be reared and trained? Legislative moralities are the principal means by which one can form mankind according to the fancy of a creative and profound will, provided of course that such an artistic will of the first order gets the power into its own hands and can make its creative will prevail over long periods in the form of legislation, religions, and morals. At present, and probably for some time to come, one will seek such colossally creative men, such really great men as I understand them, in vain. They will be lacking until after many disappointments we are forced to begin to understand why it is they are lacking, and that nothing bars with greater hostility their rise and development, at present and for some time to come, than that which is now called the morality in Europe. Just as if there were no other kind of morality, and could be no other kind than the one we already have characterized as herd morality. It is this morality which is now striving with all its power to attain to that green meadow happiness on earth, which consists in security, absence of danger, ease, facilities for livelihood, and last but not least, if all goes well, even hopes to dispense with all kinds of shepherds and bellwethers. The two doctrines which it preaches most universally are equality of rights and pity for all sufferers. And it even regards suffering itself as something which must be got rid of absolutely. That such ideas may be modern leads one to think very poorly of modernity. He, however, who has reflected deeply concerning the question, how and where the plant man has hitherto grown most vigorously, is forced to believe that this has always taken place under the opposite conditions, that to this end the danger of the situation has to increase enormously. His inventive faculty and dissembling powers have to fight their way up under long oppression and compulsion, and his will to life has to be increased to the unconditioned will to power, to overpower. He believes that danger, severity, violence, peril in the street and in the heart, inequality of rights, secrecy, stoicism, seductive art, and devilry of every kind, in short, the opposite of all gregarious desiderata, are necessary for the elevation of man. Such a morality with opposite designs, which would rear man upwards instead of to comfort and mediocrity. Such a morality with the intention of producing a ruling caste, the future lords of the earth, must, in order to be taught at all, introduce itself as if it were in some way correlated to the prevailing moral law, and must come forward under the cover of the latter's words and forms. But seeing that, to this end, a host of transitionary and deceptive measures must be discovered, and that the life of a single individual stands for almost nothing in view of the accomplishment of such lengthy tasks and aims, the first thing that must be done is to rear a new kind of man in whom the duration of the necessary will and the necessary instincts is guaranteed for many generations. This must be a new kind of ruling species and caste. This ought to be quite as clear as the somewhat lengthy and not easily expressed consequences of this thought. The aim should be to prepare a transvaluation of values for a particularly strong kind of man, most highly gifted in intellect and will, and to this end slowly and cautiously to liberate in him a whole host of slandered instincts, hitherto held in check. Whoever mediates about this problem belongs to us. The free spirits, certainly not to that kind of free spirit which has existed hitherto, for these desired practically the reverse. To this order, it seems to me, belong, above all, the pessimists of Europe, the poets and thinkers of a revolted idealism, and so far as their discontent with existence in general must consistently at least have led them to be dissatisfied with the man of the present. The same applies to certain insatiably ambitious artists who courageously and unconditionally fight against the gregarious animal for the special rights of higher men, and subdue all herd instincts and precautions of more exceptional minds by their seductive art. Thirdly, and lastly, we should include in this group all those critics and historians by whom the discovery of the Old World, which has begun so happily, this was the work of the new Columbus of German intellect, will be courageously continued, for we still stand in the very first stages of this conquest. For in the Old World, as a matter of fact, a different and more lordly morality ruled than that of today, and the man of antiquity, under the educational ban of his morality, was a stronger and deeper man than the man of today. Up to the present, he has been only the well-constituted man. The temptation, however, which from antiquity to the present day has always exercised its power on such lucky strokes of nature, i.e., on strong and enterprising souls, is, even at the present day, the most subtle and most effective of anti-democratic and anti-Christian powers, just as it was in the time of the Renaissance. 958. I am writing for a race of men which does not yet exist, for the lords of the earth. In Plato's The Ages, the following passage will be found. Quote, every one of us would like, if possible, to be master of mankind, if possible, a god. End quote. This attitude of mind must be reinstated in our midst. Englishmen, Americans, and Russians. 959. That primeval forest plant man always appears where the struggle for power has been waged longest. Great men. Primeval forest creatures, the Romans. 960. From now henceforward there will be such favorable first conditions for the greater ruling powers as have never yet been found on earth. And this is by no means the most important point. The establishment has been made possible of international race unions which will set themselves the task of rearing a ruling race, the future lords of the earth, a new vast aristocracy based upon the most severe self-discipline, in which the will of philosophical men of power and artist tyrants will be stamped upon thousands of years, a higher species of men which, thanks to their preponderance of will, knowledge, riches, and influence, will avail themselves of democratic Europe as the most suitable and supple instruments they can have for taking the fate of the earth into their own hands, and working as artist upon man himself. Enough. The time is coming for us to transform all our views on politics. Section 5. The Great Man. 961. I will endeavor to see at which periods in history great men arise. The significance of despotic moralities that have lasted a long time. They strain the bow, provided they do not break it. 962. A great man, a man whom nature has built up and invented in a grand style. What is such a man? First, in his general course of action, his consistency is so broad that owing to its very breadth it can be surveyed only with great difficulty, and consequently misleads. He possesses the capacity of extending his will over great stretches of his life, and of despising and rejecting all small things, whatever most beautiful and divine things of the world there may be among them. Secondly, he is colder, harder, less cautious, and more free from the fear of public opinion. He does not possess the virtues which are compatible with respectability and with being respected, nor any of those things which are counted among the virtues of the herd. If he is unable to lead, he walks alone. He may then perchance grunt at many things which he meets on his way. Thirdly, he asks for no compassionate heart, but servants, instruments. In his dealings with men, his one aim is to make something out of them. He knows that he cannot reveal himself to anybody. He thinks it bad taste to become familiar. And as a rule, he is not familiar when people think he is. When he is not talking to his soul, he wears a mask. He would rather lie than tell the truth, because lying requires more spirit and will. There is a loneliness within his heart which neither praise nor blame can reach, because he is his own judge, from whom is no appeal. 963. The great man is necessarily a skeptic. I do not mean to say by this that he must appear to be one, provided that greatness consists in this, to will something great, together with the means thereto. Freedom from any kind of conviction is a factor in his strength of will, and thus it is in keeping with that enlightened form of despotism which every great passion exercises. Such a passion enlists intellect in its service. It even has the courage for unholy means. It creates without hesitation. It allows itself convictions. It even uses them, but it never submits to them. The need of faith and of anything unconditionally negative or affirmative is a proof of weakness. All weakness is weakness of will. The man of faith, the believer, is necessarily an inferior species of man. From this it follows that all freedom of spirit, i.e., instinctive skepticism, is the prerequisite of greatness. 964. The great man is conscious of his power over a people and of the fact that he coincides temporarily with the people or with a century. This magnifying of his self-consciousness as causa and voluntas is misunderstood as altruism. He feels driven to means of communication. All great men are inventive in such means. They want to form great communities in their own image. They would fain give multiformity and disorder definite shape. It stimulates them to behold chaos. The misunderstanding of love. There is a slavish love which subordinates itself and gives itself away, which idealizes and deceives itself. There is a divine species of love which despises and loves at the same time, and which remodels and elevates the thing it loves. The object is to attain that enormous energy of greatness which can model the man of the future by means of discipline, and also by means of the annihilation of millions of the bungled and botched, and which can yet avoid going to ruin at the sight of the suffering created thereby, the like of which has never been seen before. 965. The revolution, confusion, and distress of whole peoples is in my opinion of less importance than the misfortunes which attend great individuals in their development. We must not allow ourselves to be deceived. The many misfortunes of all these small folk do not together constitute a sum total, except in the feelings of mighty men. To think of oneself in moments of great danger, and to draw one's own advantages from the calamities of thousands in the case of the man who differs very much from the common ruck, may be a sign of a great character, which is able to master its feeling of pity and justice. 966. In contradistinction to the animal, man has developed such a host of antagonistic instincts and impulses in himself that he has become master of the earth by means of this synthesis. Moralities are only the expression of local and limited orders of rank in this multifarious world of instincts, which prevent man from perishing through their antagonism. Thus a masterful instinct so weakens and subtilizes the instinct which opposes it that it becomes an impulse which provides the stimulus for the activity of the principal instinct. The highest man would have the greatest multifariousness in his instincts, and he would possess these in the relatively strongest degree in which he is able to endure them. As a matter of fact, wherever the plant, man, is found strong, mighty instincts are to be found opposing each other, e.g., Shakespeare, but they are subdued. 967. Would one not be justified in reckoning all great men among the wicked? This is not so easy to demonstrate in the case of individuals. They are so frequently capable of masterly dissimulation that they very often assume the airs and forms of great virtues. Often, too, they seriously reverence virtues, and in such a way as to be passionately hard towards themselves, but as the result of cruelty. Seen from a distance, such things are liable to deceive. Many, on the other hand, misunderstand themselves. Not infrequently, too, a great mission will call forth great qualities, e.g., justice. The essential fact is, the greatest men may also perhaps have great virtues, but then they also have the opposite of these virtues. I believe that it is precisely out of the presence of these opposites and of the feelings they suscitate that the great man arises. For the great man is the broad arch which spans two banks lying far apart. 968. In great men we find the specific qualities of life in their highest manifestation: injustice, falsehood, exploitation. But inasmuch as their effect has always been an overwhelming, their essential nature has been most thoroughly misunderstood and interpreted as goodness. The type of such an interpreter would be Carlyle. 969. Generally speaking, everything is worth no more and no less than one has paid for it. This, of course, does not hold good in the case of an isolated individual. The great capacities of the individual have no relation whatsoever to that which he has done, sacrificed, and suffered for them. But if one should examine the previous history of his race, one would be sure to find the records of an extraordinary storing up and capitalizing of power by means of all kinds of abstinence, struggle, industry, and determination. It is because the great man has cost so much, and not because he stands there as a miracle, as a gift from heaven, or as an accident, that he became great. Heredity is a false notion. A man's ancestors have always paid the price of what he is. 970. The danger of modesty. To adapt ourselves too early to duties, societies, and daily schemes of work in which accident may have placed us at a time when neither our powers nor our aim in life has stepped peremptorily into our consciousness. The premature certainty of conscience and feeling of relief and of sociability which is acquired by this precocious, modest attitude, and which appears to our minds as a deliverance from those inner and outer disturbances of our feelings. All this hampers and keeps a man down in the most dangerous fashion imaginable. To learn to respect things which people about us respect, as if we had no standard or right of our own to determine values. The strain of appraising things as others appraise them, counter to the whisperings of our inner state, which also has a conscience of its own, becomes a terribly subtle kind of constraint. And if in the end no explosion takes place which bursts all bonds of love and morality at once, then such a spirit becomes withered, dwarfed, feminine, and objective. The reverence of this is bad enough, but still it is better than the foregoing, to suffer from one's environment, from its praise, just as much as from its blame, to be wounded by it and to fester inwardly without betraying the fact, to defend oneself involuntarily and suspiciously against its love, to learn to be silent, and perchance to conceal this by talking, to create nooks and safe, lonely hiding places where one can go and take breath for a moment, or shed tears of sublime comfort, until at last one has grown strong enough to say, "What on earth have I to do with you?" and to go one's way alone. 971. Those men who are in themselves destinies, and whose advent is the advent of fate, the whole race of heroic bearers of burdens. Oh, how heartily and gladly would they have respite from themselves for once in a while. How they crave after stout hearts and shoulders, that they might free themselves, were it but for an hour or two, from that which oppresses them. And how fruitlessly they crave. They wait. They observe all that passes before their eyes. No man even cometh nigh to them with 1,000th part of their suffering and passion. No man guesseth to what end they have waited. At last, they learn the first lesson of their life, to wait no longer. And forthwith they learn their second lesson, to be affable, to be modest, and from that time onwards to endure everybody in every kind of thing. In short, to endure still a little more than they had endured theretofore. This is the end of Part 12 of Books 3 and 4 of The Will to Power. Thank you for listening.